Welcome to our third in our three-part series of Insights for Impact. I'm really excited to be having wrapping up the winter series and then getting ready for our summer program. Today, I'm just going to tell you a little bit about Sharity as we start the webinar off. First of all, our organization specializes in helping your organization grow and scale. We do that by making sure that you are ready to differentiate your organization, get major gifts, and grow the programs that are most important to you. Our team is scattered all over the U.S. and the world. We worked last year in 33 different countries. So no matter where your nonprofit is located, we can help you do the work to help the people in that local community. And we do a variety of different services, everything from getting you ready for campaign, helping you identify your donors and evaluate those. We have access to iWave wealth screening software, so you don't have to purchase it yourself. You can actually access that through Sharity. We also do impact and ROI research studies. We can help you develop your outcome measures and really differentiate your organization and help you stick out amongst even like-sized organizations and ones with similar missions. We do limited amounts of campaign management, but our goal is always to help you become completely self-sufficient and independent in your fundraising. So we get in and out as quickly as possible. And we also have a team that is absolutely amazing, helping you with communication and even your donor database and optimizing that. So whatever your needs might be, we probably have a Sharity expert who could help you. After this series, we're going to be changing it up a little bit for the summer and working on how do you differentiate your organization so that when you start year-end giving, kicking off, hopefully everybody's going to be working on that this summer and kicking it off in August and September, but how do you make yourself stand out? And we're going to be helping you really create an impact report, not something that regurgitates how many widgets you did this last year, how many pounds of food or how many people you helped, but really what happened because you did the work. And donors, trust me, they know the difference between outputs and outcomes. So we'll be walking you through this summer how to create the best impact report so you can tell your story in a way that gets investments, not just donations. With that, I am going to turn this over to Anne to kick us off today.
Hello, everybody. Good afternoon. It's wonderful to be back with all of you today. I'm especially excited today because we are going to be talking about succession planning, which is an important aspect of leadership of any organization. But we're also touching on something else, and that is talking a little bit about founder's syndrome, how that affects you if you're moving into a new role, but also how you can leave an organization, again, through proper succession planning. So you're leaving the field open for a new leader and leaving with grace, dignity, and an eye on the success of the organization that you've been working for. So today's webinar, it gives me great pleasure to introduce our guest for today. She is a lifelong champion for girls, women, and youth who identify as female. Dr. Luanda Ravwira, sorry if I got that tongue twisted, has dedicated her career to empowering vulnerable youth and uplifting their voices. With over 30 years of experience, she's a nationally recognized expert, published author, and sought-after trainer. She's also a dynamic leader, so she has leadership experience and has been instrumental in shaping both state and federal policies to better support girls and young women. She's authored impactful legislation and provided expert testimony at congressional hearings. So she has an incredible resume, but also has real experience in the issue we're going to be discussing today. So welcome, Luanda, to our webinar today.
Thank you so much. I'm happy to be here.
So let's dive right in. Now, I'm sure that everybody on here probably knows when we say the words founder syndrome, what that means. But could you just spend a couple of seconds, Luanda, talking about kind of what it is, but also what is the impact both on new leaders coming into an organization and on the organization as a whole.
So I can speak from the experience of being a person who followed a founder and who was a founder. And so founder syndrome, when we think about it from a leadership perspective, is how do we honor a founder who has standing in the community, who has legitimacy in the field, who has loyalty often from the staff and funders? How do we, when we take over the leadership, how do we honor that history while at the same time moving the agency forward in a way that sustains the staff that you're wanting to keep in the organization, that you keep your funders engaged and involved, and you maintain the integrity of the organization?
Exactly. So let's briefly talk about what are some of the pain points that some of us may have experienced as we walk into an organization as the brand new leader following this, often revered, respected person in the fact, but they don't let go, or your board doesn't let go of them, or your staff doesn't let go of them. What are some of the things you've seen?
I think some of the painful things you mentioned on all of those different levels, certainly coming in following a founder, whether the founder has been someone who is really revered and trusted in the community, or if there has been angst with the shifts that happen because sometimes the organization outgrew the founder. And so there was a need for change. But I think the pain points are often the grieving that you have to deal with from the staff who are loyal to the founder, the board. And often when we see with founder syndrome, organizations start as small, very grassroots. So there's friendships. And many of the people who are involved have not only professional relationships with the founder, but very personal relationships. And so they have that personal investment. And so they are grieving the loss of a friend and dealing with and really struggling with any change, regardless of the need for the change. I think those are difficult. I think also it's developing the trust with funders so that you can sustain the long-term viability of the organization. And you have funders who often, over time, have developed very personal relationships with the founder and is often not necessarily giving to the mission, but it's giving to the founder. So now you're having to come in new and build a relationship with the funding sources. And so you are dealing with it on so many different levels of how do I come in, sustain the funding while I'm building those relationships? How do I manage and support the staff while at the same time holding them accountable for all of the different things that we have to hold our staff accountable for as leaders? And then at the board level, it's oftentimes there's been a blurring of friendship and professional and governance as well. And so how do you help the board to move into the professional role of a governing board while you are so often it wasn't done like that, or so-and-so didn't do it that way. And I remember when I left the organization that I just recently founded and I transitioned, I told the staff, please don't ever say LaWanda did it this way. And so, because I had heard that before, and I know how challenging that is because you're wanting to be respectful of the founder, you're wanting to maintain the values of the organization, while at the same time, sometimes you have to make hard decisions that aren't popular.
100%. I think all of the above sounds very familiar. And you touched on something that I want to come back to a little later, and that's how you leave as a leader is going to affect how the new person can integrate into the new organization. But I'll talk about that a little later with succession planning. I think there's another piece that we have to acknowledge, and that is there is grief on the part of the board and the staff and those connections, and you're used to dealing with the person in a certain way. There are also those founders or long-term CEOs and EDs who don't let go, They're somehow so attached to that organization. Sometimes they're leaving screaming because, as you said, the organization has grown beyond them. Or sometimes they want to leave. They're retiring or whatever, but they still want to maintain that control. And I have seen founders use donor relations as a way to blackmail the organization to stay involved, and you're going to lose those donors if you don't make me happy. So again, it speaks to make sure you don't get it, or any organization CEO should make sure that multiple people have a relationship with your donors. I also experienced personally where I had to deal with staff, serious performance issues that I actually had to let go, but they were favorites of the former CEO, and they went to the former CEO, complained. That former CEO, went to a board member that he was close friends with, and the board member went to my chair complaining about Anne just fired these people and shame on her. Fortunately, I had a board chair who looked him in the eye and said, Anne is the new CEO. Staff issues are her decision. The former CEO is no longer involved in the organization, and just cut it off at its knees. So I will always worship the ground he walks on. But we have to, sorry, go ahead, Carol.
No, I was just going to also add, I've had a couple conversations this past week around how hard it is as someone who's either been a longtime CEO or really, I think more so a founder, because a lot of times a founder works for no money for a long time. Mm-hmm. And they might get the organization to a point where they've started to make some money, but they still really don't have much of a retirement account. And, as a for-profit business owner, I would hope I could sell my company or pass it off, and I would make money as if I had interest in my house or something like that. But with a nonprofit, you make nothing. You just walk away, and you hope that the blood, sweat, and tears that you've poured into it continue and is well managed and handled well. But I think that there's, a lot of times there's a disconnect with even what the way that we talk about founders leaving and how we do take care of them. I mean, if they were a minister, for instance, we would make sure they had some sort of pension plan or some way they'd been taken care of. But a lot of times I see that being an issue where founders then go back and set up some deals, and the board does things that are really not ethical at the very least. And then the new CEO is walking in and having to deal with that cash payout or whatever that debt has then been incurred by the nonprofit to the previous founder. So I think that's also an issue too, is this just kind of, it's so different than in the for-profit world. And I know, Luanda, you've had that experience on both sides, but...
and Carol, I think you're absolutely right. And I think for whether you're walking in following a founder or you are a founder and you're walking away. So I started a policy center, which was my heart for many years, for almost a decade, and, made the decision that I wanted to step down and retire. And part of it as a founder, we have to just get our ego out of the way. And that's not easy. That's easy. Those are simple words, but it's hard because you have, as Carol said, you've poured your heart into it, and you've done a lot of, even if you got paid, if you really did your salary, you were maybe making minimum wage if you were lucky in the nonprofit sector. But I think that's why it's important that we're really planful in the transition. And part of that being planful is really documenting the historical knowledge of and the mission and the values and the things that that you really do want to be part of your legacy. And so often in the nonprofit world, I think it's uncomfortable, and particularly as women, for us to talk about the legacy that we hope to leave in the field that we're working in. But if you document it and and as you are leaving, making sure that you are sharing what's really core, what's really important. And that's one of the things that I did. I, well, I was fortunate in this transition that the person we were able to promote from within. But, even with that, the new person coming in is going to change things or do things differently than maybe I would have done. But that's when you have to be willing to step away and to allow this new person to bring in her personality, to bring in her recommendations, and to not sabotage it, and to remain professional even when it's hard, even when you see some things happening that you think, oh, I wish it was going the other way. But at the same time, if you get really, if you are really, if you take the time to articulate what are the values that you want to move forward, and what was important to me was what are the values that I hope that will remain a part of the decision making and the leadership that will be modeled for the girls and the families that we're serving. And you have to model those yourself, even when you want to get involved.
I think, you touched on a few very important things. One of the things that, especially with a founder leaving, and this is really the responsibility of the board and senior staff to say, how do we really honor that person in a way that makes them feel acknowledged for probably working way more hours than they're paid for. I know in one instance, we actually named a building. I was working in housing, and we named a family housing building with the name of the former CEO. So they're in perpetuity, he's being recognized. So that was wonderful. We had another situation where we had an award. It was actually it was actually not an award. It was support for staff. They could apply for a grant to cover tuition for courses they were taking in the name of the former CEO. And so there are things you can do to really honor that person, and that's important. That's a really important part of it. I would also
and I would say that was when at the policy center. So one of the things that they knew was clear that was most important to me was that the girls were at the center of every decision making. How does this impact the girls? And so one of the ways that the board and leadership honored me was by naming an award after me that goes to a girl. And so there would have been nothing more meaningful. So that's why I say it's important to let your values be known, and for the new person coming in, part of modeling for the staff and the board and the community is how he or she will honor the founder, because that, I think, also builds trust and credibility with the staff and the board and with the donors and just collaborative partners when they see how the new leader is honoring the past.
Yes. Yeah, 100%. I love that. So I want to take us to a little other piece, and that is if you are being interviewed for a job following a founder or a long-term CEO, because you can be walking into a nightmare if it's not handled properly. So one of my suggestions, and I do this routinely because I've experienced it, is in my interview process, I ask very specifically, what is the role of the former leader going to be going forward? And again, very diplomatically, it's a job interview. You can let it be known that it is very important to you as the leader that you have the trust and confidence of the board and staff. You're going to be working to do that. You will honor the former leader. However, you do need to make it clear you don't, if they're still engaged in some way, they're going to come on the board after they leave, or, oh yeah, they're going to take another role in the organization, I would suggest you run.
And
Sorry, go ahead.
I would agree. I would absolutely agree. And one of the other questions that I ask is how do you plan to transfer the knowledge that's important for the new leader? Is there a plan in place for the new leader coming in where there will be this transfer of knowledge regarding who the funders are, what are the priorities for the organization, et cetera, as well as what are some potential challenges that I'm going to face, because it's important to know how that knowledge is going to be transferred so that you're just not working in a vacuum.
And I put 2 documents in the chat for those of you on the webinar today. Advantage to showing up in person instead of getting the video later. One is a transition plan. So what is happening, what's coming up, who are all those special relationships, what are the pitfalls? And then the other one is just a pure succession planning document.
Yes.
But I think sometimes too, the founder chooses who their successor is going to be, and that might not necessarily be the right person for the organization. And I've seen that happen as well, where they deliberately choose someone that's close to them and that they think would be carry on, or maybe that they feel deserves it, or that they promised it to. And unfortunately, that person is just not really the right fit for a CEO.
And Carol, I would say that they sometimes select the person because they know they can still be involved.
Yes.
And that can be dangerous for the just long-term survival of the organization as well.
I've had.
Well, I was going to say it's a place where boards really have to be strong, and I think the what I have seen is a place where the boards capitulate to the founder and allow them to do whatever they want. It never turns out well. Whereas if the board says, no, this is best practice, this is how we need to handle this, and we need to be the ones in charge, and honor and thank and make sure that culture is captured. I agree with all of that, but make that clean break once that person leaves, and bless and release, so to speak. But it really does, I think, come down a lot of times to the board. And as we talked about in January, sadly, a lot of boards just are not up to the task, especially boards that were developed by founders who tend to be friends and family.
And I would add, it's important to do a national search, or even at least a statewide search, because even if you are promoting from within, the board needs to see we really do have the best candidate. And that's one of the things that we did at the Policy Center. Even though we promoted from within, we did a national search. And Vicki, who's the current president, she had to compete. She put in, she applied and had to compete with the national search. And it gave, not only did it give the opportunity for the board to see, is there someone who would be a better fit? But when they selected her, they felt confident she really is our best person for this position. So it's a two-way street.
Right.
I've had conversations with more than one recruiter, and I will ask, that's actually a good time to even put this out, because you can be very honest with a recruiter versus the search committee, which has board members or whatever. And I've had recruiters say they were going to put the former CEO on the search committee. And in every case, the recruiter will say, no way, no, you can't do that. So again, another sign to look for when you're applying for a job. You don't want to walk into these situations. Now let's flip over to succession planning. Okay. You are the founder, you are the CEO and even if you're not a really long-term CEO, but you have established all of these close relationships, the donors, you're very proud of the work you're done, you're leaving. And I say there are 2 scenarios. There's the planned leave, I'm planning to retire, or I'm moving on to a new job. And then there's the what I call, I just won the lottery. scenario. I used to say hit by a bus, and I know that's horrible. So you've just won the lottery. So you're going to be, so you want to be prepared. So let's talk about what you need to do. And thank you for sending those documents. That's super helpful. But I'd like to talk about what are some things you, as that person who's leaving, can put in place to make the next leader be successful. So, Lawanda, let's talk just about some specific things that we can do.
Well, I'm a believer in for the scenario of winning the lottery. I've always had a emergency succession plan that I work with the board, and we have a plan in place with what will the interim look like in the event that I win the lottery, or who knows why I might leave unexpectedly. And no one knows about this plan except the president and CEO and the board. They worked on it together. So it is really a step by step. Here's our interim plan so that we will continue operations without interruption. And, but I think, so if you're thinking long term, it is important for you to begin as early as you can to start thinking about, even if you're not planning on transitioning for a while, to start thinking about it early. What does it look like? So you can start developing a transition plan that has very specific strategies, objectives, and tactics that the board will follow, so that it doesn't become a crisis. It doesn't become something where you just keep staying longer, or there's an interim where there's not even anyone who is in charge of the organization, but that you start early, you develop a plan, and that plan needs to really include how you are communicating with your internally and with the board. What does that communication plan looks like? And the plan needs to be very clear about the role of the board. As Carol had said earlier, that is really, this is the job of your board, is to hire and compensate, and when necessary, fire the CEO and president. That's an important part of governance. So part of this plan would include very specifically what is the role of government of your board as their obligation for governance, and be very specific about what members will be involved, who is going to be doing the interviewing, if you're going to use an agency to do a national search, if you're going to use a search agency. That plan can also, if you start early, begin to do an internal review of the talent that you have within the organization. And part of your internal plan can be, are there responsibilities that current staff can take on? Maybe they're not ready to move into the CEO position, but are there ways that you can begin to expand their responsibilities so that they take on more of a leadership role? And that, of course, helps to keep the ongoing operations moving forward without interruption. And so developing internal development plans for helping the staff to build the skills that you need to make the succession planning smoother is really critically important. But if we don't start early, then we generally don't have time to be developing staff to move into those different tasks. I would also say what's critically important is to develop a strategy for how you're going to transfer knowledge. And that's through the mentoring and coaching of your current staff, documenting your model, documenting the policies, documenting the processes. I left the organization with an encyclopedia of these are the things you need to know. And some of it is policy and processes, but some of it is just as a leader that we just intuitively do. Like I left notes on here's people that you need to talk to. Here's what you don't say to this person.
Yeah.
And here's what you do say to this person. All of those things that I wish I had known anytime I was walking in, so that it just becomes a reference guide for the new person coming in. And being thoughtful and planful in documenting how you're going to transfer the knowledge is a critical part of successful transition planning. So those would be the main things that I would recommend.
Thank you. When you talked about the documenting different people, so important. And I've been, madly leaving an organization trying to remember all those people. One of the things I would recommend, because I walked into this wasn't my idea, my present organization, we fill out every meeting. We have a database that we all have. And after a meeting, we fill out. And one of the things we include is, don't talk to them about X. They love to talk about Y. And it's already there. So you're not scrambling at the end. And I have a staff person who, man, she slaps my hand if I forget to do it, which I tell her she's totally I should be doing. So that's something to be thinking about as well. Or what are some things you can just put in process in your organization so that at the end you're not scrambling? Because maybe you are leaving more quickly and you don't have time to spend hours doing this. So think about that. Succession planning is something that's not just what work you have to do, but what do you set up in your organization that makes transitions that much easier?
And those are just they're good things to be doing just to make your organization stronger. I mean, we certainly had a database as well where you just keep personal notes. And whether you're using it for fundraising or you're trying to get that person more involved, it's just before I have a meeting, I always would check to go, ooh, that's right, I shouldn't talk about this, or remember to talk about that. And I think that those are just good processes for good management of the organization.
Exactly. Go ahead, Carol.
Well, and I was going to say, I mean, it's not dissimilar to if you have a robust donor database, you'd be making notes like that in that donor database. So, it should be a practice in your organization anyway, to have that information somewhere. But I think what we all have found, I'm sure, if you take over from another leader, it doesn't matter founder or not, there's always that drawer, where you dig the drawer out and you find
oops,
all the things that are left in the drawer. It's like, oh my gosh, financial reports from, whatever. Or where is the lease on the building? So I just want to reiterate how incredibly important it is, that institutional knowledge, but also the culture of the organization. You mentioned that, but actually documenting that's one thing I always do with founders is, what is it, if you're gone, you can't change, you can't be there to say, this is how I would like this, accounts payable handle. But you can really deepen and strengthen the culture that you've built. And documenting that is a process. It's not just because the culture can change like that. But if it's documented, and it's documented in a way like, some of the big companies, Disney or whomever, that can be a lasting legacy that the new person carries on. And it can be part of the hiring process to make sure that person is acculturated in the way that you want the organization to be. But if the board doesn't see that too, and they're not attuned to that, you can lose that culture and you can lose the heart of the agency. And then things like girls aren't prioritized anymore,
And Carol, that's critically important. I actually did some consulting work for an organization that was 100 years old, and the CEO had been there for 35 years and was retiring. And so they brought me in to do an internal assessment just to talk to the staff to inform the search committee for the new leader. And one of the major things that from the staff, and they had 3 different offices in 3 different states, consistently across the offices, their the staff's greatest concern was we will lose the culture of the organization. I mean, they were devoted to the leader who was amazing, and he was an icon in the field. And but we're adults, we know people are going to move on, but their fear was when he leaves, and a new person comes in, is it going to just change the culture and the mission and the vision of why we are devoted to the work, and documenting that, which is what we did when the board had me do after I brought this back, because they thought it was going to be, they were surprised that this was the staff's number one concern, and they wanted to keep the staff because they were researchers and highly sought after people. So then we did a process of documenting what is the culture from the perspective of the staff who were doing this work, as well as collaborative partners and funders. And it's a piece that we often don't, we're focused on finances, which we have to be, and we don't always focus on documenting the culture the way we document our financial statements every month.
And I just had sorry.
I was just going to, all right, you go.
No, go ahead, Ann. Go.
Well, I was just going to say that succession planning for a lot of people feels frightening. Yes. Or we leave it because we are busy with everything else. But I think when we're talking about legacy, the best legacy you can leave as a leader is to do really robust succession planning. To your point, Lawanda, about that culture, those values, that is something you were passing on. And you were also telling your board, your staff, your donors that you are letting go, but you are giving them all the tools they need to be successful going forward. Those are the leaders that I revere and honor, that I've followed. The ones that grasp on and say tightly, I'm like, go away. And they actively harm the organization. So successful succession planning is also about your legacy as a leader. Sorry, Carol.
No. And I think, to that point of giving a gift to the organization, also not convincing the board that it's roses and butterflies.
That's right.
Because you walk in inevitably and the board's like, the staff are amazing, finances are amazing, everything is perfect. You will have absolutely no idea. And I walk in, and the first day I had to fire somebody for a pretty egregious thing that I was like, and you're just doing this out in the open. This is bad. You have to go. So you do the person who's taking over a disservice by not saying, here are some of the concerns. I'm not leaving it in a perfect place, because no one can leave it in a perfect state. It's just not possible. And I just want to very quickly add with the culture documentation, and actually in all of these things, I recently worked with a client who was doubling in size, and they were building new locations. And it was the staff was concerned that we're going to go from this small organization to this big organization. And how do we make sure that the organization culture is going to be the same over there, and they're not going to be treated differently or have a different culture, and we're all going to still be one team? And we had to stop all the planning and step back and say, let's document the culture, because more than anything, making sure that the culture is the same. And I know, Luanda, because I used to work for you, as the organization was expanding and more centers across the state, the culture being the same, no matter which center you walked into, whether it was Miami or Orlando or Tallahassee, it felt the same. And
thank you for remembering that, Carol.
Yeah, it was important, and it was a priority. But it's not just when a leader leaves; it is also when you expand and grow. That's critically important.
Absolutely. I love that. I also, we talk about documenting and succession planning, and there's all sorts of, use Carol's guide that she sent, because there are technical things you need to worry about, right? Making sure that signing authority is passed on, that you can no longer access the bank account. You might want to, but um, so there are technical things, even in terms of communication. And this is something you work with your board on. Does a press release need to go out? Do you need to schedule meetings with donors, or do you send them, again, a donor information? All of these things are really important. But I want to spend a little bit of time about another kind of communication, and that is how you handle yourself, what messaging you send to board staff, donors, the public. Because what you want to do as a leader is leave with grace and with a focus on the health of the organization, of your employees, all of that. And there are a lot of things you can do that really communicate just by your actions, by your words, how you handle yourself. Again, that you are leaving with incredible grace. And that's what we should all want to do. And it can be so hard because you have given your blood, sweat, and tears to this organization. So I'll throw it over to either Carol or Luanda. Do you have some ideas about what are some things you can do besides sort of the official documentation?
I can share what we did at the Policy Center, and because I had been in the field of girls work for 35 years, I obviously had a lot of contacts, and people knew me because I had one focus, and it was girls in the justice system. And so when Vicki was selected to assume the role of president and CEO, we actually did a joint letter together, and where I introduced her, and then Vicki talked about her excitement, and we signed the letter together, and we sent it to. We had a couple of tiers. One was the people we were going to make phone calls to before it became public. And those were, our major donors, our major collaborators, different legislators, et cetera. So we had, and this is when I talk about having this time frame, having a plan that's very specific in terms of your task that you're going to do with a specific timeline. We had our list of people we were going to call. We didn't reach them all, but we got their voicemail. So they had a personal phone call before it became public. And so after we did those calls, and we literally had a day where we started at 9:00 in the morning and we went all day to get that group in. Then we had the letter ready to go out that made the announcement. And we also did a press release that had a quote from Vicki and then a quote from me, and a quote from the board, because we wanted to show that we are all supportive of this change, and we're excited about it, and it was really very reflective. The letter was reflective of what we've talked about here. It was honoring the past and the foundation, and then the new, looking forward to what the new leader would be bringing and the future of the organization. So we did that. Then with the press release, and then we had social media posts. And so as it flooded, and we did this over like a 48-hour period. And what was interesting about that process, we got so many calls back, and some of them were from leaders of organizations saying, we're going to do this when we leave, because we just felt like you all have modeled for us, like that you really have honored the past. And you, Luanda, your endorsement of Vicki just gives her immediate credibility, and it calms the nerves of the donors. We also met one-on-one with some donors where we did it together. But I think as much as you can, if you can show the public, as the outgoing CEO, I'm excited and I'm being honored, and I'm excited about the future. and the board is excited about where we're going, it just it gives everybody the confidence of like, oh, everything's going to be okay, because that's what you want to do, and it gives credibility to the new leader coming in.
And I just want to add that I think you also went on a long vacation after that.
I went away for 6 weeks to where I was, because I knew people would be calling me, because when you do the same work for 35 years and you know, I was in the same state, and I went away for 6 weeks, and I didn't, and of course people were calling, and I didn't, even when I got back, I didn't I didn't talk to people, because to me that would have been it would have undermined Vicky's leadership, but it also would have been a reflection on me that, you know, like I didn't, and were there parts of me that was sad? Of course there was, but I didn't want the world to know like that I was needy and needed affirmation. You know, I needed to get my affirmation from my family and my friends. And this was something that I wanted. But you're right. I went away. I disappeared.
Yeah.
And one of the other, sorry, I was going to say, one of the other things that I always do when I'm leaving is I talk to my board, because it depends on what the timing is of the transition. I will always say, I am happy, if it's possible, to either stay and help the new person in, or to respond to any questions or anything she or he has. But I make it very clear, I'm not interfering. It's at the decision of the incoming person. If they want me to stay on, happy to do so. If they want to call me and ask questions, happy to do so. But I also make it clear, if they do not want that, I'm gone. It's up to that person. And I will say to the new incoming person, here's my contact information if you have any questions, but it's yours. And I'm not, you know, I make it very clear, I'm not going to interfere. I'm just here if you need help. And again, as I've moved in, sometimes it's been really helpful to have the former CEO there for me to call and go, I just got a call from this person. I don't know what this is about. Can you tell me? 9 out of 10 times, I never have to call them. But
yeah,
sorry.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I also, I think I had transitions where I've been 10 years, 13 years at pace. The other thing I think that I made a very conscious decision about was, and to this day, having been off and running my own company for 10 years, I still get phone calls saying, did you know such and such is happening at this organization I haven't worked at for, decades? And my response is always, whether especially if it's a donor, I always say, you're not donating to that person, you're donating to the girls or to the survivors. And so please don't, because you're upset because of something that, they said about me, or it's not about me. It's not about me. And I'm a big person and I can handle it. It's about the mission, and don't abandon the mission. And so I think that also is critically important, because, as LaWanda and I were talking about, it never goes away. People will always be calling you decades later to say, oh, did you know? And it's like, but this is not mine to, I have a mantra, is it mine to fix? This is not mine to fix.
Right. Carol, I still have legislators calling me about PACE's budget. And I'm like, I left in 2005.
Yeah.
But, it's just, they're like, oh, like,
yeah, I have people that call and ask if they can make an in-kind donation. And I'm like, look, it's been 10 years. I literally don't even remember the phone number at this point.
Now, that is a strong legacy that you should both be really, really proud of. Even though you handle it correctly, it's like, I've not forgotten. And that's a wonderful feeling. I love that. So the other one, again, is often you get to know staff and or board really well. And maybe, you should not have close friendships with your staff. That's not appropriate. But I've had situations where I've left, I'm no longer their CEO. So we've become actually closer as friends. And they often want to share or bitch and complain with me. Mm-hmm. And I have to make it very clear. I do it by saying, I've left that organization. I'm so proud of the work that we did together. Still love the mission, but actually I've moved on and I just don't want to be sort of pulled back into the day to day. And again, you do it very carefully and closely, but I make it clear to my former staff that, look, let's talk about the best movie you've ever seen, not about, or I might, if they're struggling with something, I may give them general support and advice that, why don't you go and talk to so and so, or maybe having a coach would be helpful, but I'm not going to get into the business of the organization.
So Gail has a question in the chat.
Yes.
I'm in the process of rebranding and passing the torch to a younger generation. Are there any suggestions you have for a sage? So, and Gail, I know Gail is a fighter. And still looking for a mentor. But any suggestions on passing it to a younger generation?
I think that's where the documenting becomes really important. So, because I think documenting the values and the culture that is really the heart of the work that you're doing is critically important for the next generation. And it really gives them, it gives them the North Star to go back to when they're making decisions. And Carol had mentioned we work together. So, my mantra always was, so how does this benefit the girls? Or so I think just thinking about what are the values and that culture that you want to see continue to be embedded in the organization to help them have that centering place to go back to when we're faced with decisions that are great. It's never black and white, but if I can always go back to in my work, the girls, how does this impact the girls? And it helps me to make the right decision because that's the value that's most important. I would think that for me, when I was younger, I had supervisors who taught me that and who really lived their values. I had some who didn't. I learned just as much from them on how not to be a leader. But I think that that's critically important for the generation to follow, and good for you and that's what I wanted to do. I'm like, you know what? It's time for me to move on, and it's time for the next generation to take over.
And I think that especially for some of the younger generation, and this is a conversation that I've been having a lot lately, is that the 20 and 30 somethings haven't necessarily had to fight for anything. They didn't experience women's rights and fighting for, the rights of civil rights. And they haven't been through a lot of those types of things that so many of us have been through and may end up going through again. And it's so important to teach them how to do it.
And I do think, what we can do is have that conversation, which is so important, but also point them to some resources. And as we're mentoring people, and you don't have to focus on, you were used to be in that organization, they are now, but more broadly, here are some things that really helped me as I was transitioning in. Here's some of the struggles I've had, but these are the North Star. And I think bringing it back to the values, how does it affect the people that should always be the number one, right? Your value is that you're focused on the people you're serving. So I think there are lots of ways you can continue to mentor and support without getting into the nitty gritty of the organization, because that's tough. But are there any other questions? And if you want to come off mic too, please feel free. We just have about 4 minutes left. So I always want to make sure if there's any other questions or comments that people would like to share, we'd love to hear.
Yeah, I have a couple people on today that I know are founders. Anybody that have a question that we didn't hit your burning question that you want to make sure it gets covered, please just let us know. So I'm curious, LaWanda, having been a founder and taken over for a founder, one piece of advice that you would give somebody? Most important.
Listen first, then lead.
That. And for me, I know you didn't ask me, but I'll add.
No,
mine.
please. Yeah.
Know what you're walking into, and let it be known that you know that. And two, leave with grace.
I would agree with all of those. All of those. And I think the other for me is at the end of the day, always know that you stay true to the mission and focused on the priority, and you'll sleep at night because the decisions are hard. Being a CEO, being a founder, it doesn't matter what the title is, it's a really hard job.
It's a lonely job.
And it's a lonely job.
It's a very lonely job. And because at the end of the day, all of it rests on your shoulders. And I would, thinking back to the question about leaving this work to sort of the next generation, one of the things that, I'm hearing from the CEO who took over my position was, you made it look so easy. And I'm like, it was my job not to worry the staff, right? And I think, in retrospect, that was probably a disservice. But I think and when I say listen first and lead, it really is about being attuned to the staff and the people that you're serving, and really hearing and internalizing what their needs are, so that we can create the culture where we can care for the staff, so the staff can care for those that we're serving, and obviously always having those that we serve at the center of every decision that we make.
And at the end of the day, the reason we're even having this conversation, the reason that transition is so difficult, is that this isn't a job. It's a vocation. It is coming from our passion and commitment and our care and concern. That's why it's hard to let go. That's why, because we believe it, and we do. We give so much of ourselves to it. It's not like you're leaving a job at, Target, or even a corporate job where maybe you're doing, and they're not that they're not important jobs. But again, our hearts are so entwined with what we do and the people we serve. So, we also have to give ourselves grace. It is a hard thing to do, but the better prepared we are, the more we focus on the mission and the people we're serving, the better we will be as we leave.
Right.
I think we're at time, but thank you all for joining us today. Thank you, Carol and Lawanda, for a wonderful conversation. I learned some really important things, and I've been doing this for years, so I appreciate you joining us today, Lawanda, as always, Carol. And thank you to all of our folks out there, founders or incoming leaders, whoever you may be, lead with heart, lead with your heart. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, Lawanda.
Thank you, Carol, for inviting me.